Ahlan wa sahlan. Right now I want to talk about hollow verbs in derived Arabic verb patterns. For this video, I'm operating on the assumption that you understand basic verb conjugation and how derived awzan work, and also how Form 1 hollow verbs work. That will come in handy. If you need a refresher on any of those topics, there are separate videos on each of them that you can go and take a look at before you come back here. So the good news is that for a majority of the derived verb patterns, 2 through 10, the waw or ya, that is the middle letter of the root, of the judr, functions just like a consonant, which means there's no deviation from the normal assembly instructions for regular verbs. For forms 2, 3, 5, 6, and 9, that's exactly what you see here. I've taken an example for each form and put them in there, and as you can see, we have a waw or a ya, I guess just one ya, but they're occupying the place that any other consonant would, and they're functioning exactly like any consonant would. And there's no difference in terms of what a waw does in these derived forms and a ya does in these derived forms. That's the great thing about derived verb patterns. Once we get the hang of them, is they tend to be very, very consistent from one example to the next. I'd like to point out that, for example, kawwana, this verb meaning to put together, and taghayyara, this verb meaning to change internally, they both have alternate versions in these different forms. So if we wanted to take the judr kaf waw noon and put it into form 5, it would work exactly the same. Takawwana. We would keep our waw, because the waw is the real letter of the judr. Or, for example, if we wanted to talk about ghayyara, a more transitive kind of change, we could put it into form 2 and it would look like this. Ghayyara. Same down the line with these 5 examples. No need to worry about letters shifting or morphing. Sort of a break from the normal things we can expect from hollow verbs. Now, where things get a little different is with these remaining forms, 2, 7, 8, and 10. Each of them has a couple of idiosyncrasies that it's worth paying attention to. The first thing that's different is also true for Form 1 hollow verbs. In all of the first and second person past tense conjugations, we're going to drop the middle letter of the judr. So if you think of kana, a verb you probably know, you know that if you're conjugating it for first person singular, you drop that vowel and you wind up with kuntu. Same thing with all of these, except that we don't need to worry about any unpredictable vowels there. We're just going to drop the middle letters. So, for example, with this form 4 verb, athara, which can mean kind of to incite or stir up someone or something. Athara is the huwa conjugation, but if I were writing it about ana, I write athartu. Or this form 8 verb, ahtaj, meaning to need something, I would write ihtajtu. So we're dropping that alif, that is the letter of the judr, the middle letter, and this is what we wind up with. Another difference is that in forms 4 and 10, that middle vowel, whether it's actually a waw or a ya in its form 1 pattern in any conjugation, is going to bend to the will of the derived form, as it were. And it's always going to follow a certain very regular pattern. In the third person past, that vowel is always going to be alif, if it's there, unless it disappears under the circumstances we just described. And in the present tense, it's always going to be a ya in form 4 or 10. That's just how things work. And you can think of it again as these vowels, the short vowels, kind of inflicting themselves, if you will, on that middle vowel. So the middle vowel here in athara, that judr, is actually th wow, ra. But the wow is not something that we're ever going to see in this pattern because of the influence of the pattern upon it. And another little idiosyncrasy that you might notice is that in the masdar, we always add a ta marbuta to the end. That's true all the way down the line with any hollow verb in form 4 or form 10. We're always going to put a ta marbuta at the end of the masdar. 7 and 8 also kind of share the same differences, so to speak. As with 4 and 10, we're going to have an alif in the past tense if we have it. And it's always going to be an alif, no matter what the actual letter of the judr is. And, in contrast to 4 and 10, in present tense with 7 and 8, it's going to stay an alif. Actually, for any conjugation in the present tense of a hollow verb in form 7 or form 8, we're going to have that alif. The waw or the ya of the judr is just going to look like an alif in the present tense. And finally, in the masdar, it's going to be represented as a ya. You can see that we've added a ya here. Remember that vowels, waw, ya, alif, even hamza, are like chameleons in Arabic. They can shift and change, and so it's up to us to know when to be able to predict these things. So the good news is, in 7 or 8, a hollow verb, masdar is always going to have that ya as a representative, if you will, of the letter that makes it hollow. So, to take another example, احتاج, يحتاج, the judr is actually ha, waw, jim. Even though we never see a waw in there, the waw is present, is kind of in a latent form. If we wanted instead to use the judr kha, ya, ra, we would follow the same template exactly, which means that we would only ever see that ya in the masdar. So the past tense for huwa would be ikhtara, just like ihtaja. We retain that alif, and in the present tense it would also be yakhtar with an alif, same deal. And then finally, if we were talking about choosing, ikhtara, yakhtara means to choose, I guess I didn't mention that yet, we would have al-ikhtiyar, where once again, that ya of the judr becomes its true form once more, just by dint of circumstance, just because that's the pattern. Now, the more difficult way to internalize these differences, and really these are the only differences, these are pretty regular, the difficult way to do that would be to look at this chart and think, okay, I need to memorize all this in the abstract. A better way, in my opinion, would be to pick specific verbs, perhaps these, perhaps other verbs that you know that happen to be hollow verbs in each of these awzan, and make sure that you have already command of them, or if you spot one, if you're learning new vocabulary, for example, and you spot one that fits one of these patterns, then make that your template of these verbs, of these little differences. And that way, when you encounter other verbs, or when you need to construct a hollow verb in a derived pattern on the fly, you'll have that example sitting in your pocket waiting for you. That would be my suggestion. But also recognize that just because we encounter a waw or a ya in a derived verb doesn't mean that things are necessarily going to be odd or idiosyncratic. Most of the time, they will function exactly as we might expect with a normal derived verb.